first time in over 10 years, Congress has set a date for a hearing related to reparations for slavery. And it's a significant date, too. It's June 19th, which is Juneteenth. It commemorates the start of abolition back in 1865. Well, the push for legislation has been in the works since the 1980s. But the issue has really gotten new wind in its sails, with multiple Democratic presidential candidates supporting it. Though, as Axios points out, the candidates haven't signed on to directly paying Black Americans, which is the traditional understanding of reparations. So the question now, what will they do? And what, if anything, will come from this hearing? Joining me now, we have Axios political reporter Alexi McCammon. Also with us, former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, Basil Smikle. Basil is also a distinguished lecturer in politics and public policy at the City University of New York. Alexi, Basil, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Alexi, you just had a report out earlier this morning, and tell us, what exactly are the lawmakers hoping to accomplish? I want to pull up something that you had in your piece. You had, between the lines, the House subcommittee hearing is technically a study of the lasting legacy of slavery and how to get on the path to restorative justice.
That's right.
What are the lawmakers hoping to do here?
Well, it's significant, as you mentioned, because this is the first time reparations will have a hearing since 2007. So that in and of itself is a success and a movement forward for talking about reparations for slavery. But as I wrote in the piece, and as you mentioned, it is technically just a study. So it's not a bill being introduced or specific legislation about how to address reparations or even hand out payouts for folks.
It's taking a temperature.
It's taking a temperature, as you mentioned, since the 1980s this has been an issue. So it's really just looking at what could be done. And we've heard some of the 2020 contenders talk about the same idea, from Julian Castro to Elizabeth Warren, forming a commission to study the issue. But what I'm going to be watching is whether and how actual legislation or policy proposals come from the 2020 candidates and from this hearing on the Hill.
And what exactly the action is.
Exactly.
Which is interesting because we've heard all of these 2020 candidates talk about reparations, and many of them say in some vague sense that they would support it. But Basil, do they need to get more specific about what that support would actually look like?
I think there needs to be some specificity. And the truth is that even if it's not a litmus test, it is somewhat of a proxy for how you're going to engage communities of color. So I'm glad this reporting is being done and that we're actually at this place. But even if you think that reparations is somewhat nebulous right now, there are specifics about some of the issues that do impact African Americans that they do need to be talking about, whether it's affordable housing, segregation in our school system,
land ownership,
and even what Pete Buttigieg has talked about, this Douglas proposal that he talked about that affects credit scoring. So all of the components of what would eventually be, I think, part of a larger reparations package are things that these candidates are going to have to get very specific about.
So then let me ask you this. Is this even the right issue to be talking about?
I think so. Why not? You know, we've had reparations has existed in many different forms across the world. We've dealt with it here, particularly in terms of Japanese internment. So why not talk about the lasting horror of slavery and how America needs to repay communities of African Americans specifically for it? There are a lot of details that need to be worked out, but it's incredibly important that at least our presidential candidates in 2019 be talking about it in an era when facts don't seem to matter sometimes. And this president and many of the Republicans, in my opinion, have objectified communities of color.
So, Alexi, I have to ask, why now? Because, you know, I've been shocked that this conversation has gained so much steam. And, of course, reparations, as you said, we've been talking about forever. But why is this becoming an actual talking point in the year 2019?
Well, I think it's a couple of things, but I think the big movement is seeing how many 2020 candidates are talking about it, but especially someone like Senator Cory Booker, who introduced a Senate component to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's House bill. So I think that sort of drives the conversation forward. I also think, like Basil said, it's the fact that more reporters are asking candidates about that and bringing it into the national discussion, whereas we really only had Ta-Nehisi Coates' essay on the case for reparations in 2014 in The Atlantic. That really had a splash moment that brought this issue to the national stage. But it didn't really carry on after that, and he can't be the only one to sort of carry the torch on this issue. So now that we have folks from almost every publication asking all of the candidates about this, no matter their background or what they look like or where they come from, I think that's sort of adding emphasis to this issue in 2019.
Well, speaking of those other publications, the Washington Post, Basil, published something back in February, and they wrote, they said, in political sense, the term reparations is a little like socialism. It means very different things to different people, and the devil is in the details. So So in reading that, does that mean, Basil, that reparations really is not a litmus test for a lot of these 2020 candidates?
Well, I think it is to the point that you can no longer be race neutral in your policies.
Right.
You have to come really strong with how you're going to impact communities of color, especially if you're running as a Democrat, because particularly with African American women, they are the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. We as African Americans, 85% of our votes go to Democrats. So, why, or if not more. So sort of standing on the sidelines and not digging into the details is actually going to hurt you in the long run. So absolutely, you have to be more specific.